Time, folks. The biggest game of the year for the Clemson Tigers and for the South Carolina Gamecocks. This is your Palmetto Bowl preview, and to help me do it, we got Jason Priester from the Clemson Insider joining. Jason, man, I appreciate you doing this with us.
Hey, man, always a pleasure. Appreciate you having me.
Yeah, so let's start with the Clemson game against the Citadel. Was there anything you saw in that game from a Clemson perspective that gave you optimism or confidence heading into this Palmetto Bowl?
I guess you like to see the fact that the offense got a little momentum going with the first group. It's kind of been a little bit of a struggle, against Pitt and Virginia Tech and Louisville. It's just been a little up and down. A lot down against Louisville, then up and down Virginia Tech, and then up and down at Pitt. So I guess that would be my biggest thing. You saw them, start to play a little better, and you got to take the competition into account. You always got to take that into account. But, you much rather see your quarterback out there slinging it around against lesser competition than, not. So if we're looking for positivity, I guess that would be the biggest thing.
Yeah, they've got injuries on that offensive line. So they had Harris Sewell and Trent Howard starting at guard. I thought they looked fine. Again, like you said, I don't know what to read from that against the Citadel. But at least they didn't look bad against the Citadel. That would be really, really concerning.
Exactly.
They obviously struggled against Pittsburgh. So that was, I thought, a positive. A few other smaller positives. I thought Jay Haynes, I know he's a backup and may not have a huge role against South Carolina, but I thought he looked great. I still like him a lot. And then Olsen Pat Henry, I guess they rested Briningstool. I don't think he's hurt bad, but enough that it was worth resting. I thought Pat Henry looks good. I think he's a good receiver, but he's, in my opinion, a better blocker than Briningstool. I don't know how much of a drop-off there really is. Any thoughts on any of that?
You get no arguments from me on Pat Henry.
I like him.
He has really started to blossom, in that backup role behind Briningstool. I don't think, and I'm with you. I think he's a much better blocker than Briningstool. I mean, I don't really think it's comparable. He might not be the big red zone target that Briningstool is, but Briningstool might be a little bit more physically gifted. Let's put it that way. But
yeah,
I think Pat Henry has a high ceiling, and the same for Jay Haynes. I've always liked him since the first time I watched his film. I always thought that he could carve out a role for himself in the offense if it was nothing more than being that change of pace, scat back type guy that could you can bring in to give a guy like Maffa some a breather. Although they haven't done it much lately. We saw Saturday. When you hand him the ball, he can run it. But he also had a big whiff on a block. That guy got Antonio lit up one time. And that just makes me wonder if that's maybe part of the reason why we haven't seen much of him of late. But I think he can absolutely carve out a role for himself in that running back room once Maffa's moved on and whoever it is takes over.
Yeah, I think it's likely the heir apparent. I know you have Gideon Davidson coming in, but I think Jay Haynes is probably your starter next year. Notable play, obviously he had a 70-yard run, and it was Olsen Pat Henry who I think it was an inside zone, came across pretty excellent block there, opened up the hole for him. So for both of those guys, great play.
Yeah, and we're talking about, Olsen Pat Henry played probably far more receiver in high school than he did tight end. So it's a position he's had to learn, why he's been at Clemson. And, I can't say enough good things about that guy. I mean, he just, when he's out there, you rarely see him make a mistake. He doesn't whiff on a block. He doesn't have a missed assignment. I mean, I'm not saying everything, he's always perfect, but you rarely see those things out of him. So I think he can be a big part of this thing next year.
Yeah. And I was wrong about him. I believe you were pretty high on him. I thought Josh Sapp would be the guy as the number 2 tight end, but and I think Josh Sapp is perfectly fine, but Pat Henry's been so great. That was a positive. Now, talking about negatives, I think the rush defense is the obvious one. Before we dive into that, was there anything else that was concerning or negative that you saw in the game besides the rush defense?
To me, that would be absolutely the biggest thing. I get it. Citadel ran a lot of option, probably more so than they were expecting, and Clemson doesn't practice option anymore. But I mean, it to me, it's just assignment football. it gets a little frustrating to see this defense continue to make the same mistakes over and over and over and over. Just this guy in the wrong spot, this guy in the wrong gap, this guy not filling the right gap. And it's not just in one area, it's spread out, or a guy taking a bad angle. And it just seems like simple stuff, and they've not been able to get it corrected. And when you play a team that uses that much misdirection with that kind of offense, you'll get exposed in a hurry, and that's exactly what happened.
Yeah, and it's not just like triple option teams. The Citadel obviously was, but they're not anymore. But Stanford, it was working, so they just ran speed option and other plays like that, not necessarily triple option. But if South Carolina sees Clemson can't stop, just a simple speed option, they might try that too. Why not?
I would absolutely venture to guess they probably will try it. Yeah, especially, attack that side opposite of TJ Parker. I think Jaheim Lawson has been really good the past couple of games. But, I mean, it's 2 games. It's a small sample size. We've seen that side of the defensive line get exposed plenty of times over the season. I would fully expect them to try to attack that side and see if they can expose it again.
Yeah, so we'll talk more about the rush defense in a second, but I want to briefly talk about the resumes. So Clemson's best win is against Pittsburgh. That was the week before this past Saturday. That's the only team with 6+ wins Clemson has beaten all year. Their losses are to a 9-2 Georgia. They lost to them by 31, and to a 7-4 Louisville, who they lost to by 12. South Carolina has had just a murderer's row of a schedule coming into the year, and it did actually play out to be really tough. They earned wins over 8-3 Texas A&M. They got a win over 8-3 Missouri, and then they also have wins over 6-5 Oklahoma and 6-5 Vanderbilt. Their losses, close one, 3-point loss to LSU, 2-point loss to Alabama, and then they did get blown out by 24 to Ole Miss. So impressive resume. What's impressed you most about the Gamecocks this year?
That defense, man, that defense. I can make the argument that it's going to be the best defensive Clemson plays all season. Those 2 defensive ends are so good. I mean, don't get me wrong, they're good on the interior too, but Dante Stewart's been so good. The guy opposite him has been good. And they're good on the back end too. They got legit corners. I am very anxious to see how those freshman wideouts at Clemson match up against those corners and with some of the physicality they like to play with sometimes, because I think that's an area those guys have struggled with at times. To me, that's one of the 2 biggest things here in this game is, how's that passing game going to perform against that South Carolina defense? It didn't perform very well against Georgia's. And that's similar type of defense, in my opinion, or at least, from a production standpoint and aggressiveness standpoint. I am very anxious to see what they do on Saturday against that defense, because they get after the quarterback. They can stop the run. They're multiple. I mean, they do a lot of things to try and confuse the quarterback, and they'll get up and play physical on those receivers. I'm very anxious to see how this offense performs against a defense of that caliber.
Yeah, and to your point, Clemson's racked up some impressive stats offensively, but most of them are against bad teams. So it's a little hard to know how real it is. But let me give you some of those stats, because they are really impressive. Clemson is 6th in total offense at 470 yards per game, 6.5 yards per play. That's hard to do against bad teams. So that's really impressive, and that compares really favorably against South Carolina. South Carolina is only 50th in total offense, 407 yards per game, 5.9 yards per play. So pretty notable advantage for Clemson in total offense. I look at the quarterbacks. Lenore Sellers has 2,110 passing yards compared to Klubnik at over 2,700. He's got 17 touchdowns compared to Klubnik at 29. He's got 6 picks compared to Klubnik at 4. They both have 5 rushing touchdowns, and Sellers has a little bit over 100 more rushing yards than him. How do you compare those quarterbacks?
Sellers, he's a guy that I'm very familiar with. I've watched him for a long time. Watched him all throughout high school. He actually, especially over the first half of the season, in ways he reminded me of Cade from last year, where it looks like the game's just so fast for him, and he's having problems processing everything at the speed he needs to process it at, and everything's rushed. Over the last few games, it looks like it's started to slow down for him. He's getting some help from his receivers. The running game's been really good. They're both dynamic quarterbacks. They can beat you with your legs. They can beat you with the arm. I see Lenoris as a more physical runner if you're comparing the two. He's bigger. He's stronger. He's got plenty of speed, though. He's probably a little bit smaller than he was this time last year. I know they've taken some weight off of him. How much, I don't know. He said about 20 pounds last time I talked to him. He said he weighed 230. He didn't quite look that big to me, but that don't mean anything. And when he gets going, he's a load, man. He's hard to bring down. He kind of gives you, when he's running the ball in a way, or at least to me, kind of gives off some Cam Newton vibes. Just with it, he's not quite as tall, but just with his size and the way he runs it. But to me, they're similar in a lot of ways, but that would be the biggest difference in their ability to run the ball. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying K can't have an impact with his legs. We've seen he's been able to do that. I just think Sellers is the more physical runner.
Yeah, and that could be a challenge for a Clemson defense that, as we'll talk about more, struggled to stop the run. Klubnik 6'2", 210 according to ESPN. Don't know how dated that is. Compared to 6'3", 242. So that's 32 pounds heavier for Sellers, as you alluded to. As far as the playmakers at their disposal, Phil Moff is a 1,000-yard runner, averaging 5.6 yards per carry. Rocket Sanders, who's in his fourth collegiate season, 3 at Arkansas, now his first at South Carolina. He's also had a good year at 821 rushing yards, 11 touchdowns, 5 yards a carry. That offensive line was garbage last year, and they've seemed to really improve. I think that's a challenge. And then you look at the top receivers. Clemson's got, Wesco's been great. TJ Moore's been great. Antonio Williams has been the star. He leads 689 receiving yards and 10 touchdowns. For South Carolina, it's tight end Joshua Simon, 31 receptions, 433 yards, 6 touchdowns. Does Cade have more tools at his disposal, or am I missing it?
No, I believe he does. I think he's got, more dynamic pass catchers to work with. I know Mazio Bennett, I don't know what his stats are, but I know he's been a guy that Sellers likes to throw it to sometimes over there, the kid out of up there in the upstate. They've never really found a way to get that Nicholas Harbor kid involved too much, but Clemson's got those 2 former 5-stars, but both are true freshmen. And you alluded to it a minute ago. Antonio Williams has been the star of this offense. He has just been kind of that number one receiver that Clemson's lacked the past 3 years. He don't catch everything thrown his way, but he probably catches 98% of them. He just, when you need a play, it seems like that's the guy that Klubnik looks for. But yeah, I would think Klubnik probably has more weapons at his disposal. And South Carolina probably likes to lean a little more on that running game, whereas Clemson likes to be probably a little more balanced.
Yeah, and it's strange and weird and surprising, but Clemson's offense has been a problem since that 2021 season. I think they've largely fixed it. I mean, obviously, we got to see it against some better defenses like this one to really fully buy in, but I thought Matt Luke was a great hire. I still think Garrett Riley, the year before last, was a great hire. But now on defense, the defense has really regressed a lot. And I think that's sort of where the game's going to be decided. Can their defense be comparable to South Carolina's? Clemson is 55th in rushing defense. Pretty bad lately, bad last week. 140 yards per game rushing allowed. 4.36 yards per carry against a weak schedule. That's really bad compared to a really, really impressive South Carolina rush defense that's 12th nationally, so 12th compared to 55th, only 103 yards and just under 3 yards per carry. And you got to remember, South Carolina has gone against LSU and Alabama and A&M and all these great teams. They had a SEC schedule, and it was a tough one. Clemson had a fortunate ACC schedule, easier than most in the ACC. And that rush defense is still a huge disparity. A lot of what we've talked about is how South Carolina likes to run the ball. They've got a quarterback who could run the ball. Is this like a worst possible matchup for Clemson? Because that's how it feels right now.
It kind of feels that way to me too, because Clemson's had some issues outside of the drones kid at Virginia Tech. Clemson's had some issues defending athletic quarterbacks that can get out on the perimeter and run the ball. You mentioned Stanford earlier. We saw it in that game. And like you said, they just kept running it and they kept having success with it. I like the idea of running that 4-3 out there against Virginia Tech, and I think having that third linebacker helped a lot. It allowed them to get a lot more aggressive, and Virginia Tech wasn't able to run the ball. You like to think Wade Woodaz will be back this week. I'm pretty confident saying I think he will be. And if he's not, I think you're really in trouble then. But that'll give you the ability to run some more of that, and I think that this might be a team you could do that some against, depending on what kind of looks they're giving you. But I'm with you. That has been the biggest disappointment by far of this. The whole team is the ability, to defend the run, or the lack of an ability to defend the run, and it's gotten worse in each year since Venables has left. They were pretty good against the run in Wes's first year. Not too good against the pass. That was the
year they struggled against the pass.
Then they got some things shored up in the pass defense, and they started giving a little bit up a little bit more in the run last year. And then it's just kind of falling off a cliff. This year's kind of falling off a cliff. The run defense has been bad more than it's been good, far more than it's been good.
Yeah,
I think that is a major concern going into this game. It absolutely doesn't give me the warm and fuzzies thinking about it. And the thing is, I know Wes catches a lot of flack for it, but he coaches the linebackers. He don't coach the defensive tackles. He don't coach the defensive ends. He don't coach the defensive backs. And I think it's every position that's led to this, what we've seen this year. It's not just the linebackers, although they've had their share of issues too. I think once this season's over, I think if you're Dabo Swinney, you got to sit down and take a long, hard look at, what some of the reasons are. Why are you seeing the same mistakes over and over and over again and not being able to get it corrected? You got to make a decision if it's a talent thing or if it's a coaching thing. And listening to some of his comments the past few weeks, particularly after that Louisville game, I don't think he's a believer in the fact that it's a talent thing. I think he, when he said that we've got too much talent to be this bad against the run, that kind of speaks volume. That resonated with me. That stuck out to me. You don't hear him say things like that very often. So it's going to be interesting to see what he does to address this over the offseason, because you can't have your run defense be this bad and have the kind of expectations that they like to have in Clemson.
Yeah, I totally agree. And, I thought replacing Lemansky Hall with Chris Rumpf was a huge upgrade. I was honestly pretty negative about Hall, the way he was brought in, when he was brought in, and the production of defensive ends since then. I thought Rumpf was a fantastic hire, but the defensive ends really haven't taken a jump. I'm not at all implying they should or will dismiss him. They certainly won't, but it's been a disappointing year one in contrast to Matt Luke, who we've, just lauded all year on the offensive line. So you mentioned this, and I want to dive into it because it's kind of a key point that I think Clemson needs to do to win is I think they have to get Wade Woodaz back. I think with that, they also have to keep Sammy Brown in the starting lineup. He makes a couple of mistakes, but he's, I think, certainly one of their 11 best defensive players. So you get them and Barrett Carter, you get three true linebackers on the field, and you still have, I guess, what you would consider like a nickel type fourth linebacker. And maybe you just have three down linemen with Peter Woods. I guess you go Peter Woods. Do you go Lawson? You certainly have Parker. Who's that third defensive lineman? I don't know. What were you thinking when you were kind of alluding to it?
I was kind of more alluding to going with 4-3 instead of a 3-4-4, but either way works for me. Whatever gets that third, fourth linebacker. I don't know that, whatever gets that third, linebacker on the field, I'm good with. If you want to go three down linemen, I'm thinking, it's going to be Woods and Parker. Do you want Woods playing the nose, or do you want Woods out on the, what would be the end? It just depends on, I guess, what you want to do. I could see them putting Peyton Page in the middle and maybe moving Woods outside if you go with three down linemen. But I would probably, if I'm sitting here today guessing, probably think we see more four linemen with three linebackers then we would do 3 linemen. I think that gives you a little bit better, but I am absolutely 100% on board with you with the defensive ends. They've been such a disappointment for most of this year. It is absolutely, and it's easy to say this in hindsight, but I mean, I think me and you probably said it at the time too. That's a spot Clemson should have looked at in the portal last year. You know, that you see what you got on the roster. You know you're having to move your best defensive tackle outside just to make up for what you're lacking on the roster. I've never been able to figure out why they didn't at least try to address it there. But I do like the strides that Lawson's made this year. I still believe Hoffler could be a good player for you. I don't know that he's an every down end. We'll see. I don't know if he's got the quickness needed to do it, especially sideline to sideline. But you can't, if you're Dabo Swinney and you got one defensive end committed in the 2025 class, and you're looking at bringing the same guys back next year, you're liable to lose a guy like Zaire Patterson or maybe even Cade Denoff to the portal, so they could go play more than what they've been playing. That's something you're going to have to address. You're only bringing in one in the next recruiting class, and I'm not sure he's a guy that's going to be ready to play day one, as talented as he looks to be. I don't think status quo is something you want to maintain as you head into next season.
Yeah, I was really frustrated they didn't bring in a defensive end through the portal. I thought that was very obvious that they should do that. I thought moving Peter Woods to the outside was a risk because you have a guy is elite on the inside. Turns out they moved him to the outside. He was still good, but he got banged up. He wasn't elite.
It was you had nobody behind him.
Right. Well, that too. But yeah, I think that was a mistake. Obviously now Jaheim Lawson, who I did call out and say he looked great in the spring game. It took him a little while, but it wasn't totally fake because now we see him really producing as maybe Clemson's best or second best, defensive end, best guy opposite TJ Parker. So that's been real. Against Virginia Tech, they had, if I remember correctly, they had Peter Woods kind of in the 3-4 setup, and he was technically a defensive end, but they'd always have the linebacker on his side. So it was almost like he was a tackle. I think something like that could work. But yeah, to your point, you got to get Woodaz, Sammy Brown, Barrett Carter all on the field together to really have a real chance to stop this rushing attack. Maybe last couple things.
Woodaz is your best. Woodaz is probably your best linebacker in coverage too. So let's throw that out there too. You talked about their tight end being their leading receiver. You absolutely want that guy need that guy on the field.
Yeah, I like Sammy Brown more attacking the quarterback more so than in coverage, at least at this point in his career. Let's last couple things here. So pass defense, both of them are pretty comparable. Clemson's pass defense actually hasn't been as good as you'd think. 53rd at 210 yards per game allowed. That's 6.25 yards per attempt. Eye test doesn't look that terrible. Avion Terrell is pretty awesome. So a little surprised, honestly, when I saw those stats. And U of SC or South Carolina, they're 42nd, 200 yards per game allowed, 6.5 yards per attempt. So really, really similar there. I think it's more about on the ground. Any thoughts on that?
Just overall for me, I was expecting the corners to be a little better this year. I've been a little disappointed in Lucas. It's understandable to have a freshman when you're running a freshman like Hampton out there, and he's gonna have some bumps in the road. Overall, I think Terrell's been really good for the most part. He's had some lapses here and there, but every corner does. Didn't think they were particularly good in the Pitt game. None of them.
Yeah, but that was the only game I've ever seen Avion Terrell struggle.
Yeah, it kind of is what it is. But I mean, you get that other cornerback spot opposite of Terrell figured out. I think you're probably going to be really good on the back end. But you keep waiting on Lucas to put it together, and he just hasn't yet. He's a really good tackler, but he just he hadn't put it all together in coverage yet. Or he's usually a really good tackler, not always, but usually. I would definitely say the pass defense has not been as good as I was expecting. RJ Mickens has probably made himself a lot of money this year. He's been really good back there. They've had some issues at some of the other safety spots. I think Barnes has kind of had a bit of a sophomore slump, probably some of that playing in a different position instead of the nickel like it was last year. And Shelton Lewis has had some up and down moments out there too,
and injuries.
Yeah, injuries too. But all in all, I thought the pass defense would be a little bit better. But again, I think if once you get Hampton up to speed, and people, it's easy to forget because he's redshirt and they got Corey and Gibson in that room too, who they're really high on. So hopefully, it'll be a little bit better next year. But as far as this game, yes, you stop. I don't know if you're going to stop it completely, but you got to contain that running game, slow it down, not let them run it down your throat all day long. So this it's going to be about what happens in the front seven.
Yeah, so I totally agree. Yeah, I mean the passing defense stats don't look good. I wonder how much of that was garbage time. Whereas when you watch the rushing defense, it's happening from the first drive of the Stanford game, you're just getting gashed. The first drive of the Citadel game, you're getting gashed. I mean, that's far from garbage time.
Yep.
Final couple things here. Are you ready to give a prediction yet, or do you want to hold on that?
Yeah, let's see who's going to play and who's not going to play.
All right, we'll hold on that. Let me ask you something else then. So Tay Harris, 4-star cornerback, decommits from Clemson. Clemson's down to 13 commits at this time for the 2025 class. You're the recruiting expert, so I want to ask you this. You got 13. They're ranked 29th. I don't know. When does it go to 105 from 85? And how the heck, even if it's at 85, is Clemson going to get a full roster next year?
They're going to give scholarships to some of the guys that don't have them next year. That's what they're going to do. You hear Dabo. He's pretty much told you that already. If you listen to him in his press conference, man, I got to cut a bunch of guys. Which to me, if you want to hand a few walk-on guys scholarships, so be it. To me, the problem starts lying with him when you got a guy like Tay Harris, who I can say with 100% certainty that I 100% believe that guy loves Clemson, loves it. Everything about it. He was so hyped about going to Clemson. He was kind of one of the faces in this class over the past few months trying to help recruit guys there. It's just another example that Clemson's kind of falling behind in this NIL era. And if they don't get their ducks in a row and get some of that stuff worked out, I don't see anything changing in the immediate future. And I wouldn't be shocked if you don't lose another couple of guys. We'll see if it all starts to really unravel. You can make the argument it's already unraveled, but I just don't know, man. I don't like some of the things I hear about the organization and the way that the collectives, being run or managed or however you want to describe it. When you think about IPTAY and how aggressive they are in trying to fundraise and raise money, do you see the 110 Society ever being that aggressive in their efforts to raise money? You ever get emails from the 110 Society? I don't. I've never gotten one. I used to be an IPTAY member. I've never gotten an email from the 110 Society. I think they do a really good job based on everything I can gather anyway. I think they do a really good job. Football, basketball, baseball. I think they do a good job with the big donors, but it's the rest of the fan base where they're missing the mark. And there's money to be made there. If you give them a reason to invest in it, they probably will, or a lot of them will. You got to find a way to incentivize it. I don't know if that's giving away priority points. That's above my pay grade, but there's got to be some way to figure out how you can incentivize this NIL stuff and get more people on board. It shocks me to my core how many people inside the Clemson fan base don't even know how NIL works. They're still we're 3 years into this thing, and there's still people, and I mean lots of people that don't understand why you can't use IPTAY money to pay NIL money. Right. They don't realize that's two different pots of money. It doesn't work that way. I mean, I bet I have to explain that to somebody twice a week. It just shocks me that the messaging has not been better. I think a lot of that kind of starts at the top. I think Dabo sometimes makes it sound like it's not that important. And it absolutely is. I go back to his presser a few weeks ago and he starts talking about revenue share and being a game changer. And we just got to keep this NIL money raised until we get to that. Well, guess what? That NIL is not going away, man. You're going to have the money to do the rev share and all that stuff, but you're going to still need the NIL money because other schools are going to keep raising it, and they're still going to be able to make substantially better offers than what you're making. People don't understand why this kid might choose, school A over school B because school A is offering $100,000 more. Well, if it's $120,000 more, you got to think that's per year. So we start talking about $500,000, and then that changes the whole conversation.
I mean, almost everyone would take a similar job for $100,000 raise. Unless you're making several million, it's almost
absolutely. People don't understand. Man, when we losing recruits to Georgia Tech and Duke, yada yada yada. Well, that guy that Duke flipped, they also beat out Georgia for that guy. And the Georgia Tech, you look at some of the guys they've got in this class, you can tell they starting to put some money together. But when any school can flip or land anybody in this era, even a Duke, they can pull all their resources and raise enough money to go after one or two guys instead of having to worry about dispensing it across the whole roster because they don't have as much talent on the roster. But it's just a different world, and unless something changes up there in the way that NIL is run and the messaging surround it and all those things, I don't know what the future looks like, man. I fully believe Clemson can be. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying Clemson's broke or anything like that. I don't mean to come off that way, but they're not offering kids what some of these other schools are offering. And I just think they could have done a better. I just don't think they've put their best foot forward with NIL. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. I mean, Georgia Tech, I know they came to my church meets at a private school over in Roswell, Georgia. And Brent Key walks in and he offers a huge NIL deal to their 5-star linebacker. And Kirby Smart, his offer had a bunch of strings attached. And so they he chose to go to Georgia Tech, right? Like, that sounds crazy to choose Georgia Tech over Georgia, but if it's a cleaner offer, essentially, right?
They also landed that big 5-star offensive lineman Josh Petty, earlier in the cycle.
More recent,
Clemson, Florida State, a bunch of big time schools for him. So you can tell they're starting to get behind that NIL effort, and it appears to be very well organized, unlike some of the things I've heard about the 110 society.
And final comment on this topic, or at least for me, it's not impossible at Clemson because Brad Brownell has done a fantastic job. So it's not purely a Clemson thing.
Even he talked about it back at the ACC tip-off. He kept, he's talking about donor fatigue, and he's having to go back to the same 2 or 3 donors every year to come up with this money to keep guys or land guys. And if you just got the message out there, a clearer message, and making the fan base understand what it is you're trying to do, why you're doing it, why you need the fans to buy in, maybe you don't have to go back and hit those same 2 or 3 guys up every year, year after year after year. You got a little bit more coming in from, other places, and maybe you don't run into quite as much donor fatigue.
Yeah. Well, this all just makes the South Carolina game even more important. Clemson's cannot end this year with an ugly loss, no momentum, no playoff, some meaningless exhibition bowl game, and then a bad recruiting class. Absolute must win. Unless you have any final thoughts, I appreciate it.
No, I'm with you. I think this is a big one, man. I think it's a really big one. I think Clemson needs it in a bad way, not just for narratives and perceptions and those kind of things, but they need it for recruiting too. This class needs something, and the 2026 class too, which they're going to really turn the page to in January with the junior days and the elite retreat and those kind of things. They really can't afford to have to take another hit of any kind, and an embarrassing loss to your rival would absolutely be that.
Yeah, you can't be 5-8 in non-conference Power 5 or I guess Power 4 opponents in the last 5 years. You cannot do that. So huge game.
And coaches, opposing coaches, when they're recruiting against Clemson, you can best bet they are telling every kid that, hey man, they have stunk it up. Five. They just repeat that number you just said: 5-8, 5-8, 5-8. You want to go there, or you want to come be a part of something we're building here?
Yep. All right. Well, huge game. Hey, I appreciate your time. Thanks for doing this.
Absolutely, man. Always a pleasure.
Yep. You can follow Jason's work on the Clemson Insider. Thanks for watching, folks. I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Jason Priester. Huge game in this Palmetto Bowl. As always, don't forget we are sponsored by Ready Vets. If you're in the upstate and you have a dog or a cat and you need immediate assistance, can't wait to get a tough-to-find appointment with your veterinarian, check them out. They're in the Taylor's area.